Hello, I'm Phil Cahill, CEO of Ocean-Based Climate Solutions. These are 5 ideas that we are promoting to decarbonize the global economy. And it's totally relevant today with the COP25 deadlock and failure, really, in Madrid, just ended a few days ago. When you've failed 25 times, then what? News items that have come to my attention over the last few weeks. 1 million species are predicted to become extinct by 2100. Well, where are we? Among the first, in the middle, or towards the end of that? 30 Nobel Prize winning economists endorse a carbon tax to solve climate change. We'll talk about that. And they tried that in Paris, and you got riots of due to price increase. Now, yes, maybe the people in France are a little sensitive, but still, there have been other examples where a carbon tax gas price increase is not viewed favorably. So you get the picture. The politicians need some help. And talking about the carbon price, does an oil price impact the volume or the amount consumed? Is it going to reduce CO2? Well, EIA has done data on oil consumption and prices going back 50 years. And you can see the blue line is oil consumption. It is going up and up and up, regardless of the price shown in orange. Very small impact. So putting a price on carbon at the pump is not going to, in my opinion, reduce CO2. We need another approach. So here's the 5 ideas that we are thinking about. And they start with CO2, cost, COLA, quota, co-fund, and the corporate stock for carbon. That's our business model. So cost is CO2 supply taper. Eliminate, these are obvious ideas. People have talked about them. Eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. Stop new permitting for oil and gas and coal on public lands and private lands for that matter. And phase out the importing and exporting of fossil fuels. Look at the energy trade. It's in the trillions of dollars going back and forth between countries. Phase out that trade to reduce fossil fuels. In the US, I've read that we have $25 billion in annual subsidies and billions in permits. Here in New Mexico, where I live, the Permian in southeastern New Mexico is just going crazy with new permits and producing a huge amount of energy and a huge windfall for the state of New Mexico. That's great, but it has to stop. So this would potentially result in a quick and direct reduction, 1-for-1 in CO2 emissions. Fossil fuel prices will increase. That will result in windfall revenues for the suppliers and producers. And as you'll see, we propose that those be paid into a CO2 fund. If a company is making good money at $60 a barrel and the price goes up to $80 a barrel, they don't need that extra $20 if they're making good money at 60. That should go to help support climate change mitigation. COLA, CO2 Labeling Act. People don't know what the CO2 contents are of everything they buy, from airfare to products to gas at the pump. We have in the US labeling acts and many other countries, I think, nutrition, contents, fat, cholesterol, and so on products that you buy at the grocery store. Ask in this room, how many people know what is the CO2 content of 1 gallon of gasoline? It weighs 6 pounds if you have it in a container. Well, the CO2 emitted from it is 21 pounds. That's almost 4 times, 3.5 times more. That's the oxygen content. So if you drive 2,000 miles in a vehicle that gets 20 miles per gallon, you're emitting a ton of CO2. People need to know what CO2 comprises in everything they buy. Quota, CO2 quota, monthly limit on CO2 emissions purchased by individuals. Here you can see it per capita CO2 emissions. The US, around 16 tons per capita per year. To be sustainable, we need to be 3 tons per person per year. That's a lot of weight loss. On a good day, I weigh 200 pounds. I need to weigh 35 pounds. That's not going to happen. So how would you do this quota? Well, you could administer by the banking system a monthly limit of CO2 that each person is allowed to purchase per year, no carryover month to month. And that quota is attached to their money accounts, to debit, credit, other spendable funds accounts. If you overspend your quota, go to the gas pump and you fill up your tank. If you're over, you're going to pay a surcharge. It'll come directly out of your bank account and you'll know about it. And the surcharges go to the CO2 fund to help mitigate and compensate people who are displaced by climate change. So here is the CO2 fund, funded from the windfall revenues and the quota surcharges. And it's earmarked to compensate individuals who are victims from flooding, wildfires, weather, sea level rise, loss of home, have to resettle, industry downsizing. What happens to the airline industry when people begin to fly less and use communications like this, Zoom, to do presentations? So the annual proceeds in green from the CO2 supply taper, back of the envelope calculation, could be approaching $500 billion a year if it's a 20% price increase on all the oil and gas. And the quota proceeds, if you take GDP annual total, 85 trillion, per capita $17,000 per person per year globally. If a sustainable lifestyle, it's probably less than this, but let's say it's 10,000. So we have excess GDP subject to the quota fees of 7,000. Be a progressive fee schedule, whatever. You get maybe up to $12 trillion to help pay the costs for personal dislocation due to climate change. That would cover a lot. And then finally, corporate stock for carbon. This is how we do it. Public listed companies who want to become net negative or net zero CO2 can pay, and they can erase their carbon footprint, but they pay in stock, common stock, not cash. Preserves their liquidity, their bank loan covenants. There's no change to their business model. They continue investing in new products, new technology. They're not laying off people. So it's preserving the job structure of the enterprise and of the world. It's a direct subscription between the emitter, the corporation, and the remover, the negative emissions technology companies such as my company. There's no intermediaries or government. These, if you want to call them offsets, use that word. They're not really offsets. They're removing CO2 into a permanent storage. But they're not fungible. The company is not able to resell these. There's no market. You don't have all those intermediaries. Now the shareholders are going to be diluted, but they'll get their money back because the markets are preferring sustainable companies. When this company, any company, signs up for this and lets it be known that they're on a path to being 100% sustainable, they'll get bragging rights. They can have a marketing advantage. Now this is advantageous relative to the IPCC because you're applying these against corporate-wide emissions rather than country-wide emissions. So there's no cross-border impact. The corporation crosses the border with their business. And you don't have to legislate that. You don't have to have this incredibly complicated Article 6 of the Paris Accord that is a recipe for failure. So it gets around that problem. And here's a case study we did on stock for carbon for not 3M. And they're a poster child. They've reduced their emissions 70% since 2002, but still they're at 6 million tons a year. That's intractable emissions, a quarter of their business. If they paid the IMF's proposed $75 a ton per year, it would put them out of business in 5 years. Their cash would go negative by over 80%. Their working capital will plummet. Their loans would have to skyrocket. They'd be laying off people, and it would not be a good scene. Under stock for carbon, they get the same benefit of becoming net negative and a zero direct out-of-pocket cost. And so you can see in the red are the cumulative emissions. On the white bars are the negative emissions from our technology or others. And the diamond or triangle is the sum of the plus and the minus. So they go net negative by 2035 to the tune of over 25 million cumulative tons of CO2. And the stock price increase needed to pay for this, based on best available data, is only about 4%. So would their price go up a mere 4% over 15 years if they became totally sustainable? I think it would. So that's our solution. We can remove excess CO2 emissions and bend the curve to below 2 degrees C down to 1.5 degrees C by 2100 with this approach and with our technology. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and questions.